Thank you, Amna. So can you close the sessions?
Yep, they're closed.
I see them still.
Do you? Wait, let me check.
Yeah. For example, Urwa is still on. Urwa is here. Hello. But I don't know why I see Genaro in session B.
No, Lourdes, the breakout rooms are closed.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
Thank you,
over to you.
Amna.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Urwa, hello.
Hello.
Hello, my dear. Would you like to do the introduction before Julia, Elena, and Olga start?
Yeah, sure. I'm Murva. I'm from Pakistan and I'm working as Young Voices leader. Before I was working as Young Voices Council member for a year. So, welcome to World's Futures Day, Young Voices. This session is brought to you by Teach the Future, a global nonprofit dedicated to embedding futures literacy in education worldwide. World Futures Day is a partnership with the Millennium Project. Right now, we are all part of a 24-hour global conversation about our futures, creating space where all generations, especially young voices, can share their visions, concerns, and action driven projects towards a better tomorrow. Let's make this conversation count. You can find facilitators, take it away, please.
Thank you so much, Urwa.
Thank you so much, Orwa, and hello, welcome everyone. We're so happy you're able to join us for the session today. My name is Julia. I'm here with my colleagues Elena and Olga. We're from the Global Youth Coalition, and we're really excited to run today's session on the futures of environmental governance. So before we get into the session, I'm just quickly going to share my screen so that I can show you some visuals, and then we can get right into the workshop. There we go. So today we'll be working on this Miro board. But before we get started, we'd love to tell you a little bit about how we're going to structure the session and how it relates to some of the other work that we've been doing. So over the past few months, we've been working with young people on a research project on intergenerational equity, setting out to kind of understand how young people define this term of intergenerational equity and also how they imagine different futures where this concept is realized. And that's going to tie into our workshop today because we've been speaking to young people a lot about environmental governance and how that relates to intergenerational equity and the kinds of futures that they imagine there. So, throughout these different workshops over the last few months, a lot of the participants have identified certain drivers of change that they think could really revolutionize the future of environmental governance. And we'll be diving a little bit more deeply into those drivers of change today by doing something that is called a futures wheel. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this foresight tool, I'll just quickly run through it, and then my colleague Olga will take over and she'll start facilitating the session. But a futures wheel is a foresight tool that's used to visualize the direct and indirect consequences of a specific action or policy. So in this case, we're going to take those drivers of change from our previous workshops, and we'd really love you guys to think about how that can impact the future of environmental governance. So if we implement a certain policy, what are the direct consequences of that? And then of those consequences, what will happen next? And kind of map out these different futures. And we'd love for you to think about both positive and negative effects, different assumptions that might underpin these futures that you're describing, so that we can kind of create a really wholesome, holistic map of the different futures that could stem from these policies. All right. If you have any questions throughout, of course, please raise your hand and we'll try to clarify. But that was just kind of a little overview of the tool that we'll be using today. And we can now move over to the Miro board. You can see we have five different, yeah, Lourdes, sorry, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, the Miro, it says it's a private board. and we need to
Ah,
put our emails. And right now I'm receiving, I think, a code for joining in my email. Just for you to know, it said it's private.
okay. Yeah. I don't know if maybe one of my other team members, Elena, could have a quick look at that just so we can make sure everyone can join. What we'll also be doing is Elena will be taking notes of, of the things that people say, and I'll also be typing them into the Miro board as we go. So if you're unable to join the Miro board, then of course still feel free to participate out loud and just explain your ideas, and we'll take note of them for you. But of course, if you're able to join, then I think that would be the ideal scenario. All right. So the 5 different drivers of change that we're looking at today, you can see them here in the middle of the Miro board. We're not sure we're going to get to all 5, so we'll go through them one by one. We'll see how much we can get done in the time. But we're really looking at youth representation and decision-making power, enforceable accountability mechanisms when it comes to environmental governance, legal rights for future generations and nature, digital tools for inclusive participation, and intergenerational knowledge systems. And that's my introduction all done, and I'm going to pass over to my colleague Olga, who'll take it from here and walk you through the next steps. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Julia, for walking us through the futures wheel and what we are going to do today. Do you want to stop sharing so that I can do that myself, or do you want to continue?
I can go ahead and stop sharing, and then I'll just be typing as we go.
Okay, amazing. Let me share my screen. Okay. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Olga. I'm part of the Global Youth Coalition, also part of this project on youth foresight and intergenerational equity. And we've been enjoying this project and our initiative to get to know what young people think about intergenerational equity, the futures, and also what governance system might look like in a couple of years ahead. Well, not even a couple of years ahead, in like a few decades ahead. And when we were envisioning this workshop, we decided that to tie it with some of our findings, and that's how we came up with the drivers of change that keep recur throughout our conversations with young people. And we do not want necessarily impose these drivers of change on you. That's why we've decided, how about doing a bit of voting? You'll see the dots over here, and we'll vote with what driver we would like to start our conversation. And we have 5 options in front of us. It is intergenerational knowledge systems, where the knowledge is passed from one generation to another. We have youth representation and decision-making power, where young people are given real decision-making power, not just advisory roles, and young people actually meaningfully contribute to decision-making. We have enforceable accountability mechanisms, where we have truly binding mechanisms that ensure compliance by member states. We have legal rights for future generations and nature, so that we do not, as some policymakers like to refer, that there are no rights for future generations and nature, and we will be exploring this topic, how to go around that. And the last one is digital tools for inclusive participation. So, how do we go about the voting? Unfortunately, we didn't think that entirely through. So, the blue would be the first theme, green would be the second theme, yellow would be the third theme, red will be the fourth theme, and pink would be the fifth theme. And just discard this little purple circle. So just drag the circle towards the theme that you would like to discuss first, and then we'll go from there. And let me know if you have any problems with dragging the the dot. Or if you want to type in the chat what theme you would like to look at. So basically, if you want to look into intergenerational knowledge systems, just drag the blue dot towards that theme. If you would like to look into youth representation, drag the green towards the theme, and etc. Or you can generally type in the Zoom chat what your preference would be. I see a few people on the board. Just want to confirm that everyone has access. Or maybe we can do a feature in the Zoom and do the voting there. Okay, Vera shared mirror, that's amazing. And Rose says that she is interested in youth representation and legal rights for future generations. Do other people have some preferences? Okay, I think that we have some sort of understanding in the room that we might want to start with the youth representation and decision-making power, and then we can move towards legal rights for future generations and the nature. How does that sound to everyone? Okay, amazing. So we will move forward with that. Amazing. I'm also making sure I see the chat in case there is anything over there. And now if we are moving towards the wheel, you'll see that it is structured in a way you already have some sticky notes. And if we are going towards youth representation and decision-making power, we have like some pre-assigned sticky note just to fill out the wheel, but certainly make sure to drag the sticky notes from other parts of the wheel in case you do not have enough that's like in that little mini circle, mini shape, referring to youth representation and decision-making power. And the sticky notes, they are color-coded. And the explanations are at the top. So the green ones are positive impact. What is the positive impact of the driver that we have at the moment? The yellow ones are assumptions, and the red ones are risks. And by risks, meaning like what are the negative consequences? Like what's the other side of the argument when, for example, we are talking about youth representation and the decision-making power. And when we say youth representation, we can also consider children and youth representation in decision-making. And Jen has already started typing, but the first part of the wheel is exploring what are their consequences of young people having decision-making power, and what are the consequences of young people having a formal say in decision making and having formal mechanisms for them to be represented in global environmental governance. How would they look like? What would be the mechanisms? And what are the main assumptions that are pros and cons towards that state of future? So I will give you 1 to 2 minutes just to silently reflect and write your thoughts on the board. As I said, feel free to copy and like drag the stickies. And after that, we'll resume to have like a broader discussion. And feel free to have the guiding questions to guide you through this thinking, which are over here. And I think I will be asking my teammates to copy those questions into the Zoom chat so that you have it both ways. Thank you, Julia. I see a note in the chat that mirror might not be accessible to some people. Oh, thank you, Elena, for taking over with the mirror coordination. And it's almost been 2 minutes, so I invite us to continue into their broader discussion of okay, of the topic. And I already see some themes emerging from our Mira board, and you have started sharing both the assumptions and risks and positive impacts. Does anyone want to take a floor and share your reflections so that it's not just me reading out loud the sticky notes, but we start having the conversation? Gennaro, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I saw you typing on the sticky notes. Would you like to get us started?
Yes, So I wanted to put up a point on regard to more ambitious decisions that are being made. Naturally thinking that coming from youth movements and essentially we will be having naturally a perception of how these decisions affect future generations. And therefore we will be thinking that those those decisions must be the most ambitious possible. Um, so I also put one assumption that it's that there's adequate, like enabling factors like education that will help us to participate meaningfully and contributes substantially to the discussions. So yeah, that was my input. And I'll save that connection to the other consequences for the next round.
Yes, I actually wanted to piggyback a bit on that and start like broader discussion. Okay, if we have more ambitious decisions, what does it lead to? So that this question kind of organically brings us to the second outer layer of the futures wheel, where we think of consequences of the first impact when we introduce real decision-making power towards young people. So you can already start thinking and connect your first reflections on the sticky notes to the outer layer of what might happen further. So, for example, when Gennaro said that we might have more ambitious decisions, what do those ambitious decisions lead to? For example, my first instinct would say those decisions, they would actually incorporate for example, intergenerational equity, and we will have the rights of future generations and the rights of nature like established and institutionalized. That can be one of the consequences. So if you can continue reflecting on what you have written a few minutes ago and like write the consequences of that first order impact. And we can just continue with like this brainstorming. And if anyone at any point would like to jump in and have their opportunity to share your thoughts, that would be great. And one of the features of Mira that you can see, you can link your sticky notes together. And some of the people have already started doing so, like linking one sticky notes to others. So don't forget to do that. And if you have troubles figuring out how that is done, feel free to let us know. I, for example, see the note children are given real power in decision making and can lead projects on the local scale. Does anyone want to elaborate more on this?
Well, I can. It's one of the notes I made, and it was because I feel that the local scale is much more adapted to young people because they can grasp the reality of the ground and also can experiment. And today, at least, it's much more adapted to conduct experiments and start giving young people place in decision making and giving them budget and giving them the opportunity to build something in their hometown, for example.
Mm-hmm. And if we think together as a room, what can be an impact or what does it lead to that young people engage more and lead local projects. So what kind of change will we see on the local level? For example, as Jen said, local vulnerabilities will be reduced, or local communities will have more agency, and it will lead to more capacity building on the local level, and that can lead to like certain trajectory to the global scale. Okay, how about looking into the risk? We have 4 risks, and I think I'll take on this one. Burning out young people and lack of emotional awareness in existing structures. And I think this is one of their real risks that we kind of already see in the youth space, because so many young people, they engage in decision making across different levels. And I keep hearing different reflections on how burned out they are and how tired they are of tokenistic representation. So if we do not have tokenistic representation anymore, but still have this feeling of burning out, what does it lead to? Or how can we go about that? And I see 2 arrows. First one, it goes to reinforcing ideas that young people are not fit to participate. And the second one, reform of existing structures to accommodate for younger people. And I love how we see 2 different perspectives on one risk. Does anyone want to elaborate further on this or expand?
Well, I guess maybe I'll just jump in here because I did write those 2 down. And I would just love maybe from the room to hear if anyone, I just put down kind of the worst possible case I could imagine and the best possible outcome. And maybe, anyone has some ideas on how we can steer the future in either one of those directions. What kind of assumptions underpin both of those directions? I would be curious if someone wants to build on those ideas.
Okay, Rose, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I elaborated a bit on the toxicity of these environments, and what strikes me is that if today's decisions are made in a toxic environment, then they are infused by toxicity. And by recognizing that it's not adapted for children, we can recognize that it's not adapted to humans in general, and that we should change this, which is something that is kind of low-key known by everybody, but it's like we say it's the way it is, and we do not question why it is this way and how we could change it, which I think is important, because if it's toxic for children, it's toxic basically for anybody with emotions and mental health, which is a human being.
Yes, and one of the things that also keeps recurring in our research and the workshops that we do with young people is the importance of mental health and how to mainstream it even further, because this is still not that, I would say, acknowledged in these global spaces.
And young people in general advocate more for mental health than the elders. It's really a youth-led reflection on mental health.
We have now kind of identified that mental health is one of the streams that young people advocate for. What are other streams that young people are interested in? How about going a bit deeper into that? We can have this broader discussion in the room. You can share in the Zoom chat or just speak up and open your microphone. I know that Gennaro is very much interested in reforming the education systems, and also like a throwback to a few workshops that we did in August. We did almost 13 workshops across different policy areas, and one of the theme that was recurring through all the workshop was education, how we can ensure that curriculum is up to date and that it actually reflects like all the problems that are happening, and especially like in terms of environment and climate, and how can we mainstream it and integrate that it actually reflects the needs of younger generation and like serve the people and like being a tool rather than just whatever like structure that already exists. So if you're passionate about education, we can take up that topic and expand it a bit more. But other than that, we have really great contributions here. And if we're going back to, for example, more ambitious decisions, then one of the risks that can be negative is polarization. Polarization and politicization. And we need to explain more and educate on the reasons behind these ambitious decisions. And one of their other coins was integration of intergenerational equity and the rights of nature. So, how about moving forward with our next driver of change, which is legal rights for future generations in nature? And I will hand over the facilitation of this driver of change to Julia. Julia, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Olga, do you want to just keep screen sharing? Or would you
Yes.
like me to? Okay, perfect.
Yes, I
All
can
right.
do that. Just if you can type the questions to the Zoom
Yeah.
chat, and I can switch over here.
Perfect. So now that everyone has done the exercise, I hope that you're already familiar, so we don't have to explain it again, but we're just going to go through the same process, but with a new driver of change this time. So another driver of change that was identified was legal rights for future generations and nature. And so the guiding questions here that we want to look at is how can future generations and nature be given real legal rights, not just symbolic representation, symbolic recognition, and what happens when future generations are given those rights, and who should represent the interests of future generations and ecosystems in decision making, and how can laws ensure that long-term environmental protection is prioritized across all policy areas. So those are kind of the three guiding questions. And again, we'd love for you to write down some positive impacts that you think institutionalizing legal rights for future generations would have, some potential risks, and also some underlying assumptions. So we can do the same thing again, maybe take a minute or two to write down some ideas, and then let's come back into the room and discuss what we've written. Perfect. I can already see people typing, so that's great. Okay, I can already see quite a few things written down. So why don't we come back and start discussing some of the ideas? And then, of course, please feel free to continue typing. I saw Rose and Scott, you've been writing some things on the Miro board. So just curious if either one of you would like to share what you've written. I can see Rose nodding. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're
Yes,
comfortable.
no, but I can. It's a topic I'm working with regularly. So the first thing I wrote down is that when we talk about future generations, we think about people that will be far away in the future, and actually youth today are the future generation. They're already born, and they will be the first generations suffering from climate change and other environmental catastrophes. So it's important to, when building these legal rights for future generations, to acknowledge that they are already born. And also, the second risk is that building these rights, we do not consider youth as a plural generation of people of very different experiences, very different opinions, and so on, very different needs when they are in different part of the world. And to consider youth as just one homogeneous population is also a risk that we have to take into account.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that second point, especially that you brought up about us. We kind of do tend, I think, sometimes to treat youth as a homogenous group, as you were saying, and that obviously isn't the case. I would be very curious to kind of explore that idea a little bit further. Either Rose or if someone else wants to come in, what is kind of, what are the risks when we do that, when we kind of lump all the youth into one group? What potentially could be the second order consequences of that? I don't know if anyone wants to come in here. Or vice versa, if someone wants to come in on the opposing side and, talk about the consequences if we recognize youth in all its forms, shapes, and, if we recognize youth as the diverse group that it is, what are the positive or negative consequences of that? Yeah, does someone wanna come in there?
I can quickly come up on a different side of the article. So one of the arguments, one other hat that I'm wearing is being a PhD student. And my research is exactly on youth agency and intergenerational equity. And one of their interesting reflections that I see in academic literature is that we tend to put together young people and future generations in one basket and saying that young people represent future generations just because they are the closest, which is true and that is the fact. Children and young people are the closest to future generations. They can um, kind of feel what could be the needs and like what are the gaps. But at the same time, when we put together young people and future generations into like one category, it kind of dilutes the agency that young people have in the present and kind of puts young people as protectors of future generations and do not necessarily give them the agency to act now. Because one of the narratives that we see like across the youth spaces is young people are agents of tomorrow. And like this tomorrow is like referring to future generations. So how we also go about that? How do we acknowledge that young people do advocate for future generations, but they are separate constituency with their own rights and agency that needs to be protected. And I see, Scott, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Um, Thank you. It's noble to take these things into consideration, but I think that when we're looking at it from a legal standpoint, the aim should be equality, equal rights for all, be they past, present, or future, I suppose, if you want to talk about past rights. And so we almost have to lump them together, because what you have to figure out is what are those rights that need to represent the bare minimum that cannot be denied by the actions we take in the present. And so, because otherwise, I'm just afraid that I have plenty of lawyer friends, and they would already start attacking me, saying this we'll never even get past square one if we don't, just lay down some. We have to generalize. It's the nature of law, and the point is equality. And so we need to find a way in which to create equal laws that respect things which don't exist, which might mean there needs to be some sort of a reiterative or um, monitoring system for all of this as well, and needs to be put in place. So I just kind of put that forward.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point that you've just made. And I am kind of curious then, we're obviously talking about the laws now, and that's the driver of change that we're looking at. But we can also have discussions about, so once those laws are implemented, then what kinds of policies need to, go along with the implementation of those laws, so that, maybe in implementation we kind of recognize that the same law might need to apply, not differently, obviously, everyone is equal under the law, but what does that law look like in different contexts, if that makes sense? Because it is this difficult trade-off, I think, that you're describing, of like, we do need everyone to be equal under the law, and we kind of need a general rule for everyone. And there also historically have been laws that unfortunately are written in such a way that they kind of only benefit certain portions of the population. And so finding the right way to navigate that, it's such an interesting, issue that both of you have brought up, Rose and Scott. If anyone else would like to kind of add on to that, if they have any assumptions or possible consequences. Yeah, exactly. Rose has added some of the stuff we've just said to the sticky notes. Thank you so much for that. I see some other really interesting consequences. Someone wrote down, all development-linked investments must include long-term and environmental impacts. That's a really interesting one. Can someone elaborate a little bit more? What were you thinking there? How does that tie into kind of the, enshrining the rights of future generations in law as well? I don't know who wrote that one. If not, then we can also move on. Maybe the scientific understanding sticky note. I find that one very interesting as well. If someone wants to come in on that, there must be more dedicated scientific understanding on the current risks of future generations. I think on the scientific understanding one, I wonder, kind of from my perspective, sometimes I find that, or I've seen that when things are kind of enshrined in law, or when things are formalized legally, that then also directs where financial flows go, for example. So if you recognize the rights of future generations in law as a responsibility that governments have, they're then more, they feel that responsibility to perhaps also put funding into research on the needs of future generations, and to kind of, direct more attention into these things, because these rights have now been recognized in law as absolutely essential. So I think that's a potential consequence that could come out of, acknowledging the rights of future generations in law, is ultimately more funding towards then also research on future generations. Emily, I can see you have your hand up. I would love to hear your input.
Thank you so much. I basically want to comment about the point that someone raised for, is it long-term impact and environmental friendly, if I got it right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, I agree with that person's opinion and point, because if you look at the decisions we make, sometimes we affect the ecosystem, and we believe that in the world we all contribute to one another's living. For example, the human beings benefit from the ecosystem, from the animals, from the insects. So if you're coming up with an idea an innovation as a youth, and then this innovation or idea doesn't really consider nature, that means it is going to affect it in the long run. And at the end of the day, you may actually benefit shortly in a short term, but then in the long run, you're losing a lot. And maybe the nature is being spoiled, or we don't have any more like wildlife or insects, and which we need so much. For example, if you're like a farmer, there's no way you're going to probably have like maybe very good yields if the soil is spoiled. Maybe you're not minding on how you're disposing the waste products from the factories. I could give that as an example that most of us would definitely understand. So it contributes to, it is very important. As much as you're being innovative and creative, you also have to consider the biodiversity and the ecosystem, which contributes to the long run and the environmental protection for all. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Emily. Let us now, just because I've just seen the time and we do want to kind of explore one more driver of change with all of you. Let's move on to the next driver of change. I'll hand back to Olga. Of course, do feel free to keep adding sticky notes to any of the other two drivers of change we've done so far if you do come up with something. But I think Olga's going to take it away now and we can discuss the third driver of change, which I believe is digital tools for inclusive participation.
Thank you, Julia, for handing the floor over to me. I am looking into the themes and I would like to ask the room, after like discussing all these two drivers, do you have any preferences for going with our third driver of change? I do see like a couple of dots under digital tools. I see a dot under enforceable accountability mechanisms and under intergenerational knowledge systems. Do you have a strong preference towards one or another? You can type in the chat. You can voice it out. Or do you want it to be my executive decision? Knowledge, accountability, or digital tools? Okay, and we have 7 minutes before we need to wrap up. So let us go with digital tools, as this is the one that has two dots. And as Scott mentioned, it can span some interesting conversations on democracy. So for the digital tools, Julia, can you type the questions into the chat, into the Zoom chat? So for the digital tools and how to make them inclusive so that they serve not only their younger generation who is very adept in digital learning and digital platforms, but also serve older generations. And Scott, I do see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Um, this is something I was working on a while ago, but I think using digital tools, and we can keep it general unless people want to get into specifics, we might actually be able to get at the notion of direct democracy, which I think has always been very difficult. And sorry for the political theory, but Jean-Jacques Rousseau is very famous for saying, a state should be no bigger than um, something in which you can put all of the citizenry in one building so they can all make a collective decision. And so he believed in very small states. But now, we're living in times where, well, we could put everyone in a Zoom and actually have a legislative conversation and perhaps even all collectively vote on various decisions. And so maybe this is now possible. And then of course with AI and other, tools, we can make it even more and more easy, I suppose. Of course, it's a slippery slope because I guess there's dangers on both sides, but just an idea to throw out there.
Thank you for sharing this. And this immediately kind of spurred thoughts. First of all, again, piggyback on all those workshops that we have done so far, one of the themes that I noticed was like public consultations that are accessible to everyone and inclusive, both like for young people and older generations, so that exactly we are not confined to in-person places, but utilize technology for making our contributions. And another theme that rose through those workshops was using communication channels to spread knowledge and information, because one of the gaps that young people usually identify is like knowledge gap in actually understanding what opportunities exist, and also like knowledge gaps in like knowledge and literacy gaps in terms of okay, how do we communicate about like what issues we have, and how do we address like this literacy gap. And good for language barriers in multicultural states, exactly. Do we have any other reflections on what digital tools may bring? I think one of the interesting examples of how to utilize digital tools for me, I don't remember at the moment the exact name because it's 5 a.m. for me. I am in Seattle, so my brain is still a little bit fuzzy. But I have heard about their term, I think it's citizens assembly, where it's like it's not that the government represents you, but citizens from across the world are randomly selected based like on certain methodology, and it doesn't matter whether they speak the same language or like whether they have like certain education or like knowledge base. No, you are matter just for who you are and for the lived experiences that you have, and you are brought together as like a citizens assembly through like the use of digital tools. You have like an assigned interpreter who helps you out with understanding, like with all deliberations, and you discuss certain problems together and come up with solutions as ordinary citizens, and then convey that to decision makers. So this is one of the ways how digital tools can be used to exactly to the Scott's point to move towards direct democracy. So I think Elena captured some of their discussions that we have just shared with each other. If you have any other reflections or any other ideas, or maybe you have recently encountered a tool that you think might change the way we perceive communication and consultations. If not, I think we are going to wrap up now so that we can hand over the floor to the next session. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for sharing all your deep reflections with us and contributing to this project and understanding how environmental governance might evolve in the nearest future. And I think like with all this feedback and with all these ideas, we can incorporate this further into our research and share it with the wider public. So thank you so much. If you want to share any final reflections, the floor is open. If not, I'll give the word to Julia and Elena, my team members, to also like say a couple of closing words.
Yeah, just thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We're going to put our contact information, or I'll put mine in the chat. So if you are interested in staying up to date with our research or contributing to future workshops, then do please drop a message, because we'd love to continue these conversations about the future, since they are never ending, and there's so much more to discuss. And thank you so much to Teach the Future for organizing this amazing event and providing us the platform to do this today. So yeah, lots of love.
Yes, and if you have a moment, let's do a group picture, or in this case, a screenshot of our lovely faces.
Let me remove the fix in the eliminar anclaje here. Now, let's take a picture.
Let's take a picture. So whoever is taking a picture.
It's me. I got it. I have a
Amazing.
few, so.
Everyone turn up your cameras.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful contributions. Yes, stay tuned for our next iterations of the workshops. I will give the floor back to Urva for closing the session, and feel free to stay for other workshops because we are running it for 24 hours and to support our next colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, Olga, and Elena for this interactive session. As we wrap up this inspiring session, thank you all for being part of World's Future Day Young Voices. Your perspectives and participation have made this conversation truly meaningful. The journey doesn't end here. New facilitators and fresh conversations begin at the top of each hour. You are welcome to stay and continue exploring future possibilities with us. If you enjoyed today's